Pillen thinks. Members of the Nebraska National Guard were at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. They helped secure the scene that night. Governor Pillen shared on social media that Guard members here ran towards the danger when they heard the shots. The troops are deployed to D.C. as part of a mission to cut down on crime in our nation's capital. Today, Pillen responded to the attack, saying he thinks America needs to start looking into possible causes for the rise in political violence.
I think that there's something happening today that we all need to pay attention to, is the impact big tech companies are having on what goes on. As everybody walks up and down the street with these stupid phones in their face and having all of this information coming out where we're almost not able to even think for ourselves, much less if there's a person that has some mental health issues.
Well, the Pew Research Center found last fall that 77% of Republicans believe left-wing extremism is a major problem in the U.S. And nearly an identical number of Democrats, 76%, said right-wing extremism is a major problem.